The day my father returned to Seattle with his legal wife and asked my mother to cook him dinner, she already had 2 tickets bought to leave Nashville with me. The first thing Naomi did when she walked into our apartment was touch my mother's glass. Not hello, not nice to meet you. She crossed the living room like she was already familiar with it, like she'd already measured it, priced it, decided what she'd replace, and she picked up the glass my mother had kept on the kitchen shelf for 15 years. A small juice glass with a sunflower painted on the rim. My parents bought it at a Saturday market in 2004 for $12. Mom had wrapped it in a dish towel every time we moved. I had never been allowed to touch it. Naomi turned it over in her fingers and smiled at nothing. Then she let it go. I watched it fall in almost cinematic slow motion, the amber afternoon light catching the painted petals, the small arc of descent, the way time seems to stretch when something irreplaceable is about to shatter, and then it exploded against our hardwood floor. Yellow flecks skimmed toward the baseboards. The stem split clean off. Oops, Naomi said. No flinch, no sorry, no instinct to kneel down. My mother stared at the pieces for a long moment. She was still wearing her cleaning gloves from Grandma's room. Her knees were damp. She'd been on the floor for 40 minutes before my father arrived, and she hadn't even had time to stand up before his key, a key none of us knew he still had, turned in our lock. That glass cost $12. Mom said. You owe me $120. Naomi blinked. I'm sorry? 10 times the value. That's the household rule for broken items. She'd made that rule up on the spot. I'd lived in this apartment my entire life and had never once heard it, but she said it with such flat certainty that even I believed her. You're serious, Naomi said. Every cent. I was 17 years old that afternoon, 2 months from graduation, and I had spent the better part of a decade watching my mother work herself to pieces in a city that had never been particularly kind to us, Seattle. The kind of city that looks beautiful in postcards and feels like a held breath in February. We lived in a rent-controlled building in the Central District, 2nd floor, the unit with the sticky front window and the radiator that made a sound like a man clearing his throat every night at 11. I'd grown up listening to that radiator. I'd done my homework at the kitchen table under its ticking rhythm. I'd learned to sleep through it. My mother, Belinda Ose Mensa, was 44 years old and had worked as an architectural drafter for 17 years. She was good at it, meticulous, spatially gifted, the kind of person who could look at a floor plan and immediately identify where the load-bearing walls were. She worked for a firm downtown during the day and took freelance contracts at night. I'd fall asleep to the sound of her pencil moving on tracing paper. I'd wake up to find her still at the table, coffee cold, ruler balanced across her elbow. She kept shoes held together with tape until I asked her why. She said it was waste reduction. I was 12 before I understood it was money. My father, Emmanuel Asante, had been gone since I was 7. He didn't leave dramatically. He didn't slam a door or make speeches. He just began disappearing. Weekend trips that stretched into weeks. Phone calls that arrived less frequently, birthday cards with nothing written inside them except his name. Then one summer, he stopped coming back at all. Mom never explained it to me as abandonment. She said he was busy. She said he was dealing with family things. She said it in the careful, hollow way that adults talk to children when they've decided the truth would cause more damage than the silence. It took me until I was 16 to find the truth myself. Our building has an attic storage unit that each tenant gets a padlocked section of. Mom kept her important papers there, lease agreements, tax returns, my birth certificate, in a fireproof trunk she'd bought from an estate sale. The lock combination was my birthday. I'd known it since I was 13. I'd just never had a reason to use it. Until the night she came home at 1 a.m. shaking and cried for 2 hours in the shower and came to breakfast the next morning with her face completely composed and never said a word about it. I went to the attic that afternoon. The marriage certificate was in a manila envelope tucked beneath my kindergarten drawings. Emmanuel James Asante, Naomi Christine Adler, married September 14th, 2014, in Fulton County, Georgia. I was 9 years old in September 2014. I remember that birthday because Mom took me to the Science Museum and let me pick any gift from the gift shop. I chose a geode. I still have it on my windowsill. He was marrying someone else. While my mother worked double shifts to keep me in private school, while she fixed her shoes with tape and ate toast for dinner so I could have a real meal, he was in Atlanta marrying a woman named Naomi Christine Adler. I photocopied the certificate at the library. I put the original back. I kept the copy folded in my jacket pocket for 3 weeks before I finally slid it under Mom's coffee cup one morning. She read it. She set it down. She poured her coffee. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, "Thank you for telling me," and that was all. She never brought it up again. She stopped polishing the framed photo of the two of them that had lived on the bookshelf, but she didn't take it down either. She just let it collect dust. I think that was intentional. I think she wanted him to see it that way if he ever came back. He came back on a Thursday in March. My grandmother, my father's mother, had been living with us for 3 years by that point. This deserves its own explanation because the arrangement was as complicated as it sounds. pounds. When Grandma Afia began showing early signs of dementia in 2021, my father, who was her only local child, arranged for her to move in with us, with my mother, the woman he'd abandoned. He called it a temporary measure while he sorted out a more permanent care solution. He sent money at first, $1,800 a month, which covered approximately 2/3 of Grandma's medical costs and zero of the additional labor Mom took on. Mom accepted it without complaint. I never fully understood why at the time. Now I think I do. She was building something. She was being very, very patient. For 3 years, Mom managed Grandma Afia's medications, doctor appointments, dietary restrictions, and the increasingly difficult daily care that dementia demands. She did it while working full-time. She did it without a caregiver's certification or a social worker's guidance or a single word of acknowledgement from my father. She kept a binder, color-coded tabs, dated entries, documenting everything. Every medication adjustment, every fall, every confused middle-of-the-night episode where Grandma believed she was somewhere else, in some other decade. I helped when I could. I sat with Grandma in the evenings and let her tell me stories she'd already told me 40 times. I learned which realities to gently correct and which to let her inhabit peacefully. I became, without anyone officially naming it, a 17-year-old caregiver. That Thursday, I'd come home from school to find Grandma had knocked over her dinner tray. Mom was on her knees cleaning the tile when my father's key turned in the lock. He walked in with Naomi and didn't look at Mom. He looked around the apartment instead, assessingly the way you look at a property you're considering buying. His eyes moved over the furniture, the shelves, the window. His face had the particular blankness of a man who has trained himself not to show feeling. "Elise," he said, using Mom's middle name, which he'd always preferred, which she'd stopped using for herself. "Please make something nice tonight. Naomi is an important guest." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard in my life. In the weeks after I found the marriage certificate, I did something that probably seems excessive for a 16-year-old. I started keeping records. I don't know exactly what I was preparing for, but I'd inherited my mother's precision, her drafter's instinct to document, to measure, to create a record that couldn't be argued with, and something in me knew that whatever was coming would require evidence. I started with the bank statements. Mom kept them in a different folder in the attic trunk, organized by year. I photographed every page going back 10 years with my phone. $1,800 a month from my father's account, arriving with perfect regularity until about 8 months ago when it stopped. I cross-referenced it with Mom's pay slips, which she'd kept in the same folder. Her income, her expenses, the receipts for my school tuition, the hospital bills. None of his money appeared anywhere in our finances. Not once, not a dollar, which meant the transfers were going somewhere else. I didn't know where until I found the notebook. I want to be clear about the timeline because this matters. Everything I'm about to tell you, I already knew before he walked through our door. The glass breaking, the scene in the hallway, none of that was improvised. Mom and I hadn't scripted it, but we were ready. We'd been ready for a long time. 2 weeks before my father arrived, I was sitting with Grandma Afia, while she drifted in and out of a light sleep. She'd been agitated that evening, grabbing at her blanket, murmuring names I didn't recognize. At one point, she said very clearly, "Give it to Samantha. Make sure Samantha gets it." Then she fell back asleep. I'd heard the name Samantha before, my father's younger sister. She showed up at family gatherings in expensive clothes and left without helping clean up. She'd never had a stable job as far as I knew. She had acrylic nails done every 2 weeks and somehow always managed to look recently returned from somewhere warm. After Grandma settled, I noticed a corner of blue sticking out from under her mattress. A small, spiral notebook. The kind you can buy for $1 at any pharmacy. I shouldn't have read it. I know that. I know it now the way I knew it then. The knowledge didn't stop me. It was Grandma's handwriting, precise and deliberate. The way she wrote before the dementia made letters unreliable. Dated entries going back years. Monthly records of transfers. January, $1,800 for Samantha, debt payment. February, $1,800. Car payment. March, $2,000. Lawyer fees. May, $1,800. Credit card. Page after page. Every month for 10 years. My father thought he'd been sending money to support his mother and his child. Instead, Grandma had been redirecting every transfer to his sister. She'd positioned herself as the account holder, a detail buried in the original arrangement he'd trusted without reviewing, and she'd been quietly siphoning every dollar to Samantha while my mother taped her shoes together and ate toast for dinner and worked past midnight so I could stay in private school. $218,000. That's what I calculated later, photocopying each page at the library on a Tuesday afternoon while the printer hummed and a woman next to me printed coupons. $218,000 gone to Samantha's car payments and credit cards and lawyer fees for situations I didn't know about and didn't need to. I sat on the edge of Grandma's bed for a long time after I finished reading. Then I put the notebook in my backpack and didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Back to Thursday. After Naomi dropped the glass and my mother said every cent, my father's face changed. The blankness cracked. Underneath it was something older and uglier. The particular frustration of a man who has spent a long time being given things without asking and cannot locate the logic of being denied. Belinda, his voice had dropped. Stop this. You were never this petty before. I became this, Mom said, because I spent 10 years cleaning up everything you chose to break. I had never in my life heard my mother say anything like that. I'd heard her quiet for 10 years. I'd heard her composed and careful and endlessly functional. I'd heard her cry exactly once, in the shower, at 1 a.m. for 2 hours. When she thought I couldn't hear. She hadn't cried in front of anyone. Not once. Not even close. She bent down and picked up the pieces of the glass with her bare hands. She didn't flinch when a shard cut her palm. She just wrapped the pieces in a dish towel and set them on the counter and turned the water on to rinse her hand. She was methodical about it. She was methodical about everything. Naomi leaned toward my father. She's been turning everyone in this building against you for years, she said, loud enough for me to hear, probably intended for me to hear. The hallway door was open. The way sound travels in our building, the high ceilings, the old plaster walls, voices carry well. Mr. Henderson from 2A had come to his doorway. Mrs. Park from across the hall was visible through her screen door. Another neighbor I recognized from the mailboxes stood at the top of the stairs. Someone's phone screen was glowing. Mom looked at me. One look. Her eyes moved to my face, then to my backpack, then back to my face. That was the signal. It wasn't prearranged, and we'd never discussed it, but I understood it completely. I reached into my bag and pulled out the notebook. My hands weren't shaking. That surprised me. I'd imagined this moment, or some version of it, for 2 weeks, and I'd assumed I'd be terrified. But I was completely calm. The way you get calm when something you've been dreading finally arrives and you realize the dread was always worse than the thing itself. I opened to the first page. January, I said. $1,800 for Samantha. Debt payment. The sound my father made was not quite a word. February, $1,800. Car payment. March, $2,000. Lawyer fees. What is that? He stepped forward. Alice, what is that? January, I said. $1,800 for Samantha. Debt payment. The sound my father made was not quite a word. February, $1,800. Car payment. March, $2,000. Lawyer fees. What is that? He stepped forward. Alice, what is that? May, $1,800. Credit card. June, $1,850. Car insurance. July, he grabbed the notebook. I let him have it. I'd photographed every page at the library 3 weeks earlier, backed up the images in 4 separate locations. My laptop, Google Drive, a Dropbox folder, and a flash drive I'd given to Ms. Townsend, my school counselor, who had a master's in social work and 14 years of experience in youth advocacy, in a sealed envelope with instructions to open it only if something happened to me. Ms. Townsend had raised an eyebrow at the envelope. She'd asked me twice if I was safe. I told her I was safe, just careful. She'd accepted the envelope without further questions. She'd seen enough kids to know when one was making contingency plans, and when those plans were the sanest thing in the room. My father flipped through the notebook. The color drained from his face in stages, the way the sky changes before a serious storm. He stopped on a page near the middle, kept staring at it. Mother, he said, his voice cracked on the second syllable. Tell me this isn't true. Grandma Afia stood in the doorway of her bedroom. She'd come out during the commotion, drawn by the noise or some instinct older than her confusion. She was wearing her yellow housecoat, the one with the embroidered pocket. She looked at her son. She stared at the floor. The silence was answer enough. Mom had been quiet through all of this. Now she pulled a black folder from her tote bag and set it on the kitchen table with a sound like a period at the end of a very long sentence. 10 years of bank statements, she said. 10 years of my pay slips. Every school receipt, every hospital bill from your mother's care, every pharmacy receipt, every copay. She tapped the top page. Her cut palm left a small red smear on the corner of the paper. None of your money is in here, because none of it ever came to us. Mr. Henderson was no longer pretending to be doing anything else. Mrs. Park had fully crossed into the hallway. The neighbor from the stairs had moved closer. The phone screen was still glowing. My father's grief lasted about 45 seconds. I watched it move through him. Real, maybe, or at least real enough. And then something harder and more practiced moved in behind it. He straightened his jacket. He looked at my mother. He looked at me. He looked at the neighbors in the hallway. Enough, he said. Both of you. Enough of this. He pointed at Mom. You live in my house. You will not embarrass me like this in front of these people. Mr. Henderson made a sound that was not quite a laugh. He was 71 years old. He had lived in this building since before my mother was born. He had watched her carry Grandma's groceries up 2 flights of stairs when the elevator was broken and Grandma's back was bad. He had helped her drag the medical supply delivery through the lobby when there was no one else to help. He had signed for packages and held spare keys and never once asked for anything in return. Your house, he said. The 2 words landed like something physical. My father turned to him with the measured patience of a man who is very angry and has decided to perform otherwise. David, he said, I respect you, but this is a family matter. I want dinner on the table in 1 hour, my father said, to the room and to no one, and I want this hallway cleared. He looked at me directly, and here is the thing about looking at your child as an obstacle. Here is the thing about looking at the person your absence shaped into someone who had to learn to be prepared, someone who had to learn to document and plan and survive your choices, looking at that person and believing you still have authority over her. Alice, go to your room. I looked back at him. I thought about all the birthday cards with nothing written in them except his name. I thought about the geode I bought at the Science Museum gift shop while he was in Atlanta signing a marriage certificate. I thought about my mother's shoes. I thought about the notebook entries, 120 months of them, and the particular quietness of a woman who had decided a long time ago that she was going to build something indestructible out of the rubble of what he'd left her. I didn't move. He stepped closer to Mom. He lowered his voice the way men do when they want to sound reasonable and instead sound frightening. "Belinda," he said, "I'm not asking." Mom looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned and walked into the bedroom and closed the door behind her. My father stood a little taller. The familiar geometry of a man who believes he has won reassembled itself across his shoulders. Naomi touched his arm. "See," she said softly, "she just needs to be reminded of her place." Mrs. Park made a sharp sound, like something snapping. Mr. Henderson opened his mouth, and then the bedroom door opened. My mother came out with a suitcase. I was right behind her with mine. I'd packed it 2 weeks ago, the afternoon after I found the notebook. It had been sitting in my closet under my winter coats, waiting. She stopped in the center of the hallway, in front of every neighbor, in front of Naomi, who had gone very still, in front of my father, whose expression was doing something complicated I still don't have exact words for. Then, "You can't be serious. I started planning this," Mom said, "the night Alice showed me the marriage certificate." I watched his eyes move to me. Something shifted in them, something that might have been recognition or regret, or both. "That was 16 months ago," she said. "I've had a long time to get ready." She smoothed her coat. She picked up the black folder and slid it back into her tote. She looked calmly and deliberately at each of the neighbors in the hallway, at Mrs. Park, at Mr. Henderson, at the woman from the stairs whose name I'd never learned but who'd signed for my packages when I wasn't home. 16 months, Mom said again, for the hallway, for the record. Then she looked at my father one last time. "The care logs for your mother are in the binder on the kitchen table. Her medication schedule is posted on the refrigerator. Her cardiologist is Dr. Yemi Adeyemi at Swedish Medical. His number is in the binder. She has an appointment on the 14th that you'll need to reschedule if you can't make it." She hoisted her tote onto her shoulder. "The lease is in my name. I paid the renewal fee 6 weeks ago. The apartment is mine." She reached into her coat pocket and placed 2 train tickets on top of the black folder on the table. Nashville, departing in 3 hours and 14 minutes. My father's smile was gone. It did not come back. Then my mother walked to the door, and I followed her, and we went down the stairs without looking back. I want to tell you that I felt triumphant walking out of that building, that I carried something clean and final in my chest all the way to King Street Station. The truth is, I felt like I was dissolving. I'd been running on preparation for 16 months, on research and documentation and the specific alertness of a person who is always listening for the next thing to go wrong. And now the preparation was over, and I had no idea what living without it felt like. I was 17 years old. I was leaving the only home I'd ever had, the radiator that cleared its throat every night at 11, the sticky front window, the shelf where the glass with the sunflower used to sit. Mr. Henderson was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. He held out an envelope. "From the building," he said. His voice was gruff the way gruff men's voices get when they're feeling something they'd rather not name. "Everyone who could contribute." Mom opened it. I didn't see the amount. She closed it and held it against her chest for a moment with her eyes shut. "Thank you, David," she said. "That man has never deserved you," he said. "Not once in the years I've known you." She nodded once, like that settled something long contested, and we walked out into the cold March afternoon and didn't look back at the building. Nashville didn't fix anything. I want to be honest about that. It was just different, which sometimes is enough of a start. Mom had a contact there, a woman named Constance Bright, a partner at an architectural firm she'd worked with remotely for 3 years. Constance had offered her a staff position twice and been politely declined twice. The third offer came through in January of that year, 2 months before we left. This time, Mom accepted. We moved into a furnished 2-bedroom in East Nashville that Constance had helped her find. It smelled like someone else's cooking and had carpet in the bedrooms, which I'd never had. I transferred to a public school for my last 2 months of senior year. My transcript traveled fine. My AP scores had been strong enough. I graduated in June in a gymnasium that was too hot, and I didn't know anyone's name when they called mine across the stage, and my mother cried. That was the second time I'd seen her cry. But the other thing, the legal thing, didn't end when we left Seattle. Here's what I didn't know until later. My mother had not spent 16 months just packing. She'd spent 16 months building a case. 3 months after I found the marriage certificate and slid it under her coffee cup, Mom contacted an attorney named Patricia Wambua, family law specialist, 22 years of practice, offices in Seattle and Portland, with particular expertise in financial exploitation of vulnerable adults. Mom had found her through a women's legal resource network the kind of resource that exists because it has to. She had 6 consultations before she signed a retainer. She told me later she'd wanted to be certain before she committed, certain of the case, certain of the outcome, certain that what she was building was solid enough to stand on. Ms. Ose Mensah came to me with one of the most thoroughly documented cases I've seen from a non-legal professional, Patricia told me much later, when I was in college and had started asking questions about the process. She had organized records that most clients take months to compile. I knew immediately she wasn't going to let this go. Patricia filed on 2 tracks simultaneously. The first was a financial exploitation complaint. Formally, an Adult Protective Services referral escalated to civil action against Grandma Afia's estate, specifically targeting Samantha Asante as the beneficiary of a decade of fraudulently redirected funds. The notebook was Exhibit A. The bank statements I'd photographed were Exhibit B through F. To support the financial analysis, Patricia engaged Richard Thuo, a forensic accountant who had previously worked with the Washington State Attorney General's office and had spent 11 years tracing financial fraud in family estate cases. His report, which ran to 47 pages, documented the full transfer history and attributed $218,400 in diverted funds directly to Samantha. The second track was a domestic partnership dissolution and asset claim. My parents had never formally married in Washington, but a long-term domestic partnership with documented joint assets and a child carries legal weight that my father had simply chosen to ignore, the way he'd ignored most things he found inconvenient. Detective Yolanda Marsh of the Seattle Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit contacted us in July, 4 months after we left. 28 years on the force, 6 in financial crimes. She had the particular manner of someone who has stopped being surprised by what people do to each other, but hasn't stopped caring about doing something about it. She interviewed my mother by video conference for 4 hours. She interviewed me for 40 minutes. She asked precise questions and wrote down every answer. Miss Asante, she said, using my father's name, which I had already decided to change but hadn't yet filed for. The notebook. Walk me through exactly where you found it and exactly how you handled it. I walked her through it, step by step. She nodded at intervals. You photographed it before moving it? Yes. You returned the original to its location? Yes. And the copies are in 4 locations. You named them as your laptop, Google Drive, a Dropbox account, and a physical flash drive held by your school counselor. Yes. Something moved in her face. Not quite a smile, but close to one. Your mother raised you well, she said. Samantha Asante was charged with financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult in September, 6 months after we left Seattle. She hired a defense attorney, a man named Gerald Fife, who had an office in Bellevue and a specialty in estate disputes, and contested the charge vigorously. The civil trial took 11 months. I was in my first semester of college by the time it concluded, studying urban planning with a housing policy concentration, and I did not attend. Richard Thuo's forensic report was the spine of the case. 47 pages of documented transfers, account structures, signature analysis, and timeline reconstruction. The judge, the Honorable Louise Bertrand Kirk, family court, 16 years on the bench, described the conduct in her written ruling as a sustained and deliberate exploitation of a familial trust arrangement over an extraordinary period of time, executed with apparent knowledge of the harm it caused to the dependent minor and primary caregiver. Restitution was ordered, $218,400. Samantha did not have $218,000. She had never really had it. It had moved through her hands and into cars and vacations, and a lifestyle built on a foundation she'd forgotten was borrowed. She filed for bankruptcy within 8 months of the ruling. A lien was placed on her remaining assets, the acrylic nails I cannot speak to. My father retained his own attorney, Gordon Strauss, Buckhead, Atlanta, a man whose firm website used the phrase "protecting your legacy" in the header. My father retained his own attorney, Gordon Strauss, Buckhead, Atlanta, a man whose firm website used the phrase "protecting your legacy" in the header, the footer, and the bio page, and was ultimately not criminally charged. He was named as a co-respondent in the civil action, which is a matter of public record. The reputational consequences of that in his professional network and in the Atlanta church community he'd become prominent in were not nothing. They were, by some accounts I received secondhand, considerable. Naomi left him 18 months after we did. I know this because a mutual family acquaintance sent me a message about it. I read it once and did not respond. I didn't need any details. It didn't change anything that had already happened. Grandma Afia moved to a memory care facility in late 2023. My father arranged it. He visited twice a week, according to what little remained of my family contact network. I thought about this for a long time. I thought about what she'd done 1. 10 years of redirected money, 10 years of signatures in a ledger, 10 years of choices that left my mother working past midnight with tape on her shoes, while her granddaughter slept in the next room. I thought about what that requires. Not a single moment of cruelty, but sustained, deliberate monthly cruelty dressed up as paperwork. And I thought about the woman who braided my hair, who taught me to make jollof rice on Saturday mornings with the radio playing something I couldn't identify, but still recognize when I hear it now, who told me stories in Twi until I fell asleep, her voice dropping lower as the words ran out, her hand moving in slow circles on my back, who reached for my hand during her confused evenings and called me by her daughter's name, and looked at me with such complete and uncomplicated warmth that I would have answered to any name she gave me. People are not one thing. I know that now in a way I couldn't know at 17. It doesn't make the harm disappear. It doesn't resolve into something clean and manageable. It just sits alongside everything else, and you learn to hold contradictions without demanding that they collapse into a simpler shape. I visit her when I'm in Seattle, not often, but sometimes I go. Mom got promoted 18 months after joining Constance's firm. She's leading a team now on a mixed-income housing development downtown, the kind of project she'd talked about wanting for years and never had the bandwidth to pursue, because bandwidth is a thing that requires not spending your entire capacity surviving. She bought new shoes. This sounds small. It isn't. She walked into a store and spent 20 minutes choosing between two pairs, not which was more functional, not which was on sale, just which one she actually wanted. She came home and held them up in the kitchen light and said, "Look at these, Alice," like it was something worth stopping to notice. It was. I changed my last name in January of my first year of college. Ose Mensa, my mother's full name. The paperwork took 6 weeks and cost $94 and was the most uncomplicated thing I'd done in years. My father called when he found out. I don't know how he found out. The family network still has its tributaries. I let it go to voicemail. He said he understood. He said he hoped I'd give him the chance to explain someday. He said he was sorry in a way that was careful not to be specific about what exactly he was sorry for. I listened to the message twice, then I deleted it. I'm not saying I'll never speak to him again. I'm 20 years old. These things don't end the way stories end. They change shape. They become something you carry differently over time. He is my father. That is a permanent fact I hold alongside everything else he is and everything he failed to be. I haven't figured out what I want that to mean for the rest of my life. But I'm also 20 years old, studying in a city that isn't the one I grew up in, surrounded by people who know only the version of me that came after everything. I have time. I have choices. I have a whole future to decide what I want it to look like. That is a luxury I did not always expect to have. I intend to use it carefully. The glass is gone. I know that. It's been gone for 2 years, and I've stopped expecting to see it on a shelf somewhere. But sometimes when I'm washing dishes in my apartment, the one I share with 2 roommates, small and slightly grimy and lit by a window that faces the brick wall of the building next door, I think about the sunflower painted on the rim, the Saturday market in 2004, the $12. $2 people who hadn't yet become what they'd become, buying a small, beautiful thing and not knowing what would happen to it. I think about my mother kneeling on the hardwood floor, picking up the pieces with her bare hands, not crying, not performing, just collecting what was left with the same methodical care she gave to everything. The binder, the folder, the pay slips, the receipts, the 16 months of patient preparation that looked, from the outside, like a woman who had simply decided to leave. She always knew she was going to take us to Nashville. The tickets were already bought. She just needed him to see one more time exactly who he was, to stand in the apartment that was no longer his, in front of the neighbors he'd ignored, and the mother he'd trusted, and the daughter he'd abandoned, and understand what he'd walked back into. I think he saw it. I don't know if it changed anything for him, but we were already gone.